We're going to continue on now with the next module, and this module covers the problem with social enterprise. So, if you ask these post-growth economists that are re-envisioning a new world, what is the solution? 9 times out of 10, they're going to tell you, well, the solution is social enterprise. You know, they might point to 1 or 2 examples, and then at that point, they just kind of shrug their shoulders because, well, they're economists. They're not entrepreneurship professors, so that's kind of where their area of expertise ends. But the question is, you know, is social enterprise really the answer? Does it feel like the way that social enterprise is now? Does it feel like that's the answer? Partly. Maybe. Let's see. Muhammad Yunus is commonly considered to be the father of social enterprise. He's a Nobel Prize winning economist who created the concept of microfinance. He founded the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh that offers microloans primarily to women for starting their own businesses, and then, well, they're very small loans. I mean, it could be, let's say, $100. And he mostly gives it to women because men tend to drink the money. And at that point, the women can then start the businesses, and the majority of the time, they pay back the loan. Actually, the default rate on these loans is fairly low. But even if they do default, it's actually not that big of a deal because for the Western investors that put their money in, I mean, it's only $100. You know, and for a Westerner, $100 isn't very much money. But of course, in a place like Bangladesh, $100 is a whole lot of money. So Grameen Bank has spread all over the world. And he also, Muhammad Yunus wrote one of the very first books on social entrepreneurship. Specifically, he actually called it Social Business. And the name of his book is called Building Social Business. To my knowledge, he's one of the very first people ever to have written a book on social business and to canonize it as a set of principles, hence the Nobel Prize. I would like to play a short clip of Muhammad Yunus and a talk that he gave at the Q Berlin conference, not this past year, but the year before. He is going to describe his vision of social business, and, well, I think his words will speak for themselves.
And while I'm working with the poor people, I got involved with many other issues. Their healthcare, their education, technology, housing, sanitation, all kinds of things. Every time I try to address a problem, I create a business to solve it. So every point that I mention, against it, there's a business that I've created. And a series of businesses in the country. Many of them are nationwide businesses. But they have a very special kind of features in them, which people keep arguing, why do we do that way? I create those businesses to solve problems, all the problems that I mentioned. Their whole objective is to solve the problem, and without any intention of making any personal profit out of it. So those of us who own those banks or own those businesses don't take any profit out of this business. We are entitled to take back the investment money, but none other than that. The future profit is plowed back into the business. So many argue, is this a business? It doesn't fit into the nature of business that we see. You have to make money. I said, business is making money, but I'm not taking the profit. Is there any law that forces me to take the profit out of the business? I don't know if Bangladesh doesn't have such a law. So I'm just leaving it to the business and I take back the investment amount, that's all. So it became a very big debate whether this is a peculiar type of business or this is a kind of business that you can do. I kept saying that this is a business. It has all the features. And it is something which you can C that follows all the principles except orientation to profit. I said I could have done all those things, everything that I mentioned, by charity programs. I can bring charity to address healthcare, address education. This is what we do all the time. Charities address all these issues. Foundations do that. Companies do the CSR, they do that. But I always mention charity has a limitation. Charity money goes out, does work, does wonderful work, but money doesn't come back. You have only one-time use of your money. I said, what I'm doing, I'm taking the objective of charity, put a business engine behind it. Then the money goes out, does the work, and comes back. I can use it again and again, infinitely. It becomes very powerful money. And I give it a name, call it social business. Non-dividend company to solve human problems. So I said, this is a new class of business. Today, if we have to teach economics, we have to teach, there are two kinds of business. Business to make money, business to solve problems. If that happens, probably it will widen up more opportunities to address the issues that we have.
Well said. Non-dividend business for solving human problems. So these are brilliant ideas. And Silicon Valley and its proponents also thought that it was quite a good set of ideas. And they said, solving human problems, yes. No dividend? That doesn't really work for us. So we're just going to pretend that we didn't hear that. Let's sweep that part under the carpet. And thus evolved the social enterprise ecosystem. The social enterprise ecosystem, that includes things like impact investors and B corporations getting acquired by Unilever. And at a certain point in time, people start asking, what actually is the difference between a social enterprise and a normal company that's just a little bit less evil? Because the problem is, as soon as the actual social enterprise movement started diverging from Muhammad Yunus's vision, it kind of took the teeth out of his idea. He said it very clearly, non-dividend business for solving human problems. But this turned, again, into things like the triple bottom line. If you guys know anything at all about social enterprise, you've probably heard about the triple bottom line. People, planet, profit. I say people, yes. Planet, yes. Profit, not if you're talking about dividend. Double bottom line, maybe. People, planet, all right. But the other thing is the whole concept of doing well by doing good. Right, okay. How well exactly do you have to do by doing good? Does this mean getting acquired by Unilever, doing well? Or are we just talking about, having a middle-class salary and being able to retire? I prefer to think in terms of being middle class by doing good. If we can be middle class by doing good, I think that's good enough for me. And I think, to be quite honest, it's good enough for most people. As the social entrepreneurship ecosystem has evolved, there's been a class of new legal entities that have been introduced, including most prominently things like the B Corporation, but also legal entities like the LC3, social purpose companies, community interest companies, etc., in various countries. They're trying to find the balance between the triple bottom line. So, where do you put the planet, where do you put the people, where do you put the profit, and how do you balance these things? So what you wind up having is essentially low profit companies, but how do you find the balance, and where do you actually find that line, and how do you determine when something's low profit It's very subjective, and it's also very tricky. Also, the most popular of the forms of legal, well, it's not a legal entity, well, it's a little confusing. So there's a B corporation, and then there's being a certified B corporation. So B corporation, well, the B Corp actually is a legal entity form in the United States, but the thing is there's actually also a company, called B Lab that actually created this certification called B Corporation. And the truth is you actually have to pay some certain amount of money per year to be certified as a B Corporation. So this is actually a commercial company. And anytime, you have to actually pay some commercial corporation money to actually be certified as something social, to me that already starts to raise question marks in my head. Do you really have to pay a company, to be certified as being social, really? So anyway, but nonetheless, I mean, you can see there's this trend, and even governments are starting to move in this direction by creating these limited profit corporation forms. But people are still skeptical because social entrepreneurship as of yet has not delivered on its promise. We've got all of these great ideas. We can build a company for this and a company for that. And, how long ago did Muhammad Yunus write his book anyways? I mean, it was probably at least, gosh, I don't know, 15 years ago or something like that. And, yeah, there's a bunch of social enterprises and B Corps now, but has it reformed the world? Is it doing so fast enough? Is this providing us the solutions that we need? People don't know. And you can look at it and feel a bit despondent about it, and again read about companies getting acquired, and we're trying to find our way, and the problem is even the social entrepreneurs don't have the answers. I've had these really strange experiences. Like I'm part of Radically Open Security has been involved with this thing called Social Enterprise NL, which is this really awesome platform for social enterprises in the Netherlands. Really great folks, that started it. But one time I was at one of their events, and I was speaking on a particular panel, and a social entrepreneur was basically going on and on about, oh yeah, and we're going to get all this impact investment, and we're going to get huge, and we're going to, big impact, and at which point I'm just like, she doesn't get it. And it's not that anybody's intentions are bad. Most of the social entrepreneurs that are doing this, their hearts are in the right place. But the problem is we are using a set of tools that are faulty. We have a methodology in our heads that isn't quite straight, and we're working with a culture even that's broken. So the question is, how can we find our way, and are there different sets of tools? There's talk of greenwashing, social washing, even open source washing. Yes, that's a thing. But essentially using so-called being social just as a pure marketing gimmick, and there's a lot of great examples. I mean, just large corporations with one small corporate social responsibility effort, and now suddenly, yay, we're green, but we're doing this and we're doing that and we're doing that, and So people actually are starting to get very skeptical about social enterprise in general, because it seems sometimes that it's being more used even for social washing than for making positive change. And if you're asking a question, you have a social enterprise, and then that social enterprise is acquired by a multinational. Was that actually ever a social enterprise to begin with? I mean, probably. I mean, I think so. But something doesn't feel right. And the question is, how can we resolve, this inherent tension with the triple, that's part of the triple bottom line. There's been a really brilliant book written called Winners Take All by a former management consultant. And he very much knows how to put words to the inherent contradictions, the inherent hypocrisy, actually, of trying to do well by doing good. So I would highly recommend this book as good reading material for everyone. But I think what we really need to do is we need to recognize that there's actually a spectrum of social enterprise. Not many people think about this, But there's a spectrum ranging from the, from the traditional commercial for-profit end of things all the way to the nonprofit, no dividend vision that Muhammad Yunus had. I think by now that we know very well what the commercial end of the spectrum looks like. I think that that end of the spectrum has been very well explored. But I think that the no dividend, aka post-growth side of the spectrum is a green field, ripe for exploration. And that's exciting because it means that there's work we can do. This actually is a sign of the times. There's a growing backlash, also from Silicon Valley itself, of entrepreneurs that are starting to understand that there is something wrong with the Silicon Valley model. And they're struggling and they're reaching to try and find alternatives. One such movement called themselves the Zebras. And the zebras essentially are quite sick of the unicorns. Of course, unicorns being the billion-dollar valued corporations, coming out of Silicon Valley, but also elsewhere. And zebras say, well, we want to be a different kind of animal. We run in herds, and we're fairly laid back, and we just want to have our own integrity and do our own thing here, hence the zebra. But you can see from their website, when VC firms prize time on site over truth, a lucky few may profit, but civil society suffers. When shareholder return trumps collective well-being, democracy itself is threatened. The reality is that business models breed behavior, and at scale, that behavior can lead to far-reaching, sometimes destructive outcomes. So this is a cool group of people. You, as far as I know, don't have to pay any money to join their group. Links to their website. They also organize DazzleCon, which is also their annual collection of zebras getting together and hanging out. There are also other communities that are looking in this direction. If, for example, you look at the peer-to-peer community and the Peer-to-Peer Foundation with Michael Bowens and that group of folks, there's all kinds of very interesting little kind of micro movements popping up here and there, all of which I think are worth spending some time studying. I'm not going to go into a lot of time on them because, to be quite honest, it would take me a whole nother day, to cover what all of these things are, but I open this up to you as things you can investigate after the fact. But things open co-ops, platform co-ops, open commons, steward-owned companies, decentralized autonomous organizations, post-capitalist entrepreneurship, community shares, ethical banks, the solidarity economy, fair trade, circular economy, transition towns, and local currencies. These are all really awesome grassroots movements that are very much tapping into the same spirit, and they're trying to come up with new forms, new ways of doing business. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on them because it would take quite a bit of time to explain it all, and actually I want to focus on sort of my own experiences and my own post-growth entrepreneurship methodology. But I would highly recommend, I think there's an awful lot to be learned and to be inspired by each of these lines of thought. So I would recommend that you guys have a look at all of them. All right, so this brings us now finally to the question, so what is post-growth business? You're doing a lot of talking about it, but what is it actually? Well, of course, I can only give you my interpretation of what it is. What I believe that post-growth business should be, and again, this is my belief. Other people can offer other definitions, but my definition would be, first of all, number one, no dividend. This is the extractive element that is creating all of these problems. I believe that if we want to build post-growth businesses, we cannot have those flat growth curves if we have the dividend. So I believe we need to find ways to remove this completely. Secondly, no exits. Exits are what are leading to the short-term thinking that's causing a lot of bad social and environmental decisions. I believe that we need to remove the exit completely from business, at least if you want to be post-growth. Number 3, no external investors. Again, because the external investors are bringing in that extra voice that's looking for the 10x. You know, we don't want that voice in our companies, and they have no place being there. This is what I believe post-growth business should be. Silicon Valley is going to find my model completely useless. There's a number of other characteristics that I believe are important to post-growth business, even though I wouldn't canonize them as the definition of it. First of all decisions and operations, large and small, should be in service of some kind of a well-defined social mission. It's okay if that social mission is something fairly mundane. It doesn't have to be super world-changing. It can just be something tiny and fairly modest. We're going to get into the issue of social missions later. I think you also need a cap on the salaries of staff, including founders and the directors. That way, I mean, you're not very post-growth. I think I wouldn't feel very post-growth if I were earning salaries of €1 million a year, you know, plus bonuses. What exactly is the level of that cap? I don't know. I would say that this is basically an area for research. It probably depends on the context of the industry you're working in. It probably depends on the context of the location that you're living. But I would leave this question open, you know, to future work. Fair working conditions for the staff. Okay, what does that mean? I don't know. But you know, it's one of those things. It's hard to define, but you can feel it when you see it. So, but again, I mean, actually defining this, I would leave this open as work that we can look into. Very important one. The contracts must not be able to be changed to undo these restrictions. You know? If I'm a post-growth company and then I can change the contract so now I can have an exit, that breaks the whole thing. So we actually need to have a solid legal foundation to make sure that, you know, if you breach the contract, that it is going to be so painful for you that, you know, you just wouldn't want to do it. And this comes to the last one, which is basically a suitably draconian default clause to prevent intentional breach of contract. So basically, I mean, unfortunately, I can't get people sent to jail. I mean, I would need the help of the government for that one. But you can make such a huge fine that would be imposed upon intentional breach of contract, doing something like trying to sell the company, that you actually maybe wish you would have been sent to jail instead. So we need to think about these things. So my own starting points for attempting to hack together a legal form for post-growth business was I started with an obscure Dutch tax construction called a fiscaal fondswervende instelling, a fiscal fundraising institution. Now, most people have never heard of this. This is actually an obscure fiscal construction from the Dutch church. So churches sometimes want to do fundraising, like a brownie bake or, you know, whatever. So, you know, the church makes a commercial spin-off. That spin-off raises some money somehow, and then they want the money to go with a tax benefit back to the church again. A famous example of this construction is the Language Institute. Regina Caeli, otherwise known in Dutch as the Nonnen van Vught, or in English, the Nuns of Vught. Vught is this little tiny village in the east of the Netherlands. And the relationship is the nuns started the Language Institute. The Language Institute is this independently operating language institute of very high quality. Actually, the Queen of the Netherlands, who's Argentinian, learned quite a bit of her Dutch at this language institute. And then the money goes with a tax benefit back to the nuns again. That's how this works. So I basically took this fiscal construction and I said, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make my commercial spin-off a security consultancy company, and I'm going to make my church the NLNet Foundation. And NLNet is a Dutch public benefit corporation called an ANBI Stichting, so basically a foundation certified to be of the public good. And they do things related to fair internet, digital rights, academic research, open source. You know, they've sponsored, you know, GNU and DNSSEC and all kinds of great stuff, really, Jitsi and, you know, anything for a better internet, basically. So I wanted to set up my company in such a way that if any profits, aka dividend, was made, that would actually be forced to go to this charity. So this was actually my initial attempt at trying to create something that eliminated the dividend. Or at least if there was any dividend, it would have to go to charity and it wouldn't go to me. And this fiscal construction was an actual way of enforcing it, because if I do not do this, I will get in trouble with the tax authorities, and that can lead me to getting sent to jail. You know, so this, you know, was the closest I could sort of come at the beginning, you know, to finding some kind of a business model hack to try to put at least one of these three restrictions into place with my own company. So I actually had to negotiate with the tax authorities about the maximum number of cash that I'm allowed to keep in my bank account before I am forced by law to give it to NLNet. This is kind of weird. Another restriction of being an FFI is that I am required as a company to have volunteers. That's a really odd restriction, but it actually makes sense, because if they want to prove that you're charitable, yeah, well then you should be able to find people that are willing to volunteer for you, right? So it's their way of kind of doing a check and a balance. So, you know, this works, you know, but of course it is a tax construction, and the whole reason for it really is for getting, you know, a tax benefit. It's really a tax deduction. That, of course, is not what I'm after. I'm not looking for a tax deduction. In fact, I qualify for the tax deduction now because I am an FFI, but I've never used it. I'm not going to apply for it because one question I get, and it's very strange, but I've given talks about exactly this kind of stuff at conferences of accountants. And they said, Melanie, you've got some really interesting ideas, but why did you choose to use a business model that's most commonly known for tax evasion? Yeah, it's true. Most people use that FFI model because they're trying to avoid paying taxes. So, you know, I was like, okay, point taken, you know, which is why I've never used the deduction. I don't even want to raise those kinds of questions, you know, in the context of what I'm doing. But of course, this is what it is meant for. So, but, you know, but this, of course, is problematic. Look, this was just my starting point, right? And you have to start somewhere. But of course, at a certain point, you want to ask questions, well, how can you improve on this? So, you know, again, there's these problems with this fiscal model. So the way that Radically Open Security is set up, we are a combination of what's called a BV and a stichting, so basically a foundation and a company. And I have what's called a working company, Radically Open Security BV, so that's the company. This is what's registered as a FFI. 100% of the shares of Radically Open Security, the company, are owned by Radically Open Security, the stichting, which is basically the foundation. So the foundation owns 100% of the shares of my company. We then are registered as an FFI with the tax authorities, and we also contractually, like literally have a contract that says I will give 100% of my profits to NLNet. And that's actually a separate business-to-business contract that I have with NLNet. So after I founded Radically Open Security BV, you know, the company part of it, I literally sold it for €1 to the foundation. I mean, worst sale ever, of course, you know, but hey, you know, hopefully I get other things out of it. So, but this is the actual legal setup that I currently have with Radically Open Security. We also made some attempts in our statutes to write our actual mission into the statutes, including, you know, writing the fact that we are a fiscal fundraising institution for NLNet, you know, and, you know, literally went back to my notary and said, okay, this is good. I think I have one out of the three parts of being post-growth in my business now. But the problem is I can still sell the company. So I'm getting part of the way there, but I'm not getting all the way there. So I went to my notary and said, okay, I want you to do the following. I want you to add to my statutes that I'm not allowed to sell the company and that I can't have investors. Can you do this for me? And my notary said to me, Melanie, you're very sweet. I like you very much, but I can't do this for you. Because, look, I'm a professional, and I'm not going to deliver a piece of work to you if I don't believe that it's legally going to stand up in the court of law. So I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm sorry. So I said, okay, this means that there's some work to do. So then I went and spoke with some lawyers and, asked some friends of mine that are lawyers, do you know how to do this? Do you know how to solve this problem? To actually create, a company that doesn't have dividend, doesn't exit, and can't have external capital. And they were all kind of scratching their heads and being like, well, wow, this is a hard problem. We don't necessarily know how to do it, but we can try. There's a few possibilities, perhaps, in how you can implement it. But of course, it's not until you try it, and it's not until there's actual jurisprudence that we would know for sure. But actually, this is research. Legal research. At which point I was just like, wow, I'm really getting in pretty deep for a computer scientist. But, everybody likes a good challenge. So, so I want to essentially move the post-growth structure away from the FFI. I don't want to be dependent on the FFI, and there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, the FFI is a fiscal construction that's primarily meant for giving you a tax benefit. That also means that the tax authorities have the ability to say yes or no to giving you this status, which means that if that's the definition of post-growth, it basically means that the tax authorities can say yes or no to your being post-growth. That doesn't make any sense. So chances are, this FFI thing, it was a nice experiment, but it's probably not the answer that we're looking for. And again, it also doesn't restrict investments or exits. So it gets us part of the way there, but it doesn't get us all the way there. But then the question is, okay, but how? How? And the problem is, unfortunately, at this time, there is no purpose-fit entity for post-growth businesses, from the government. I can't just go to the Chamber of Commerce and say, hello there, I want to start a post-growth business, We've got these limited profit forms, but that doesn't, it's not the same thing. They don't restrict exits. They don't, maybe they restrict dividends to a certain extent, but they certainly don't completely do away with it. And they don't restrict investment either. So, in that sense, it doesn't work. So the question is, can we hack something together with contract law? And that's really what this has turned into. It's legal hacking. But we're up to a good challenge. And let me tell you, I'm a hacker. And I believe that we can hack things. And if you want any better example, just look at the open source movement. The open source movement managed to hack together contracts like the GPL, the General Protection License, and like the Creative Commons license, these common open source licenses that put restrictions on intellectual property. And these are restrictions that have been fought in court and that have been litigated, and they've won, and there have been commercial payouts, for breaches of things like the GPL. So we know how to do legal hacking. We've done this already. So really, it's just a question of, can we canonize a different set of restrictions? Okay, open source movement did it for IP. Can we do it for exits and for dividends and for venture capital or external capital? Why not? So I'm currently right now working with lawyers and, on actually creating these legal contracts. And I'm working it on right now with the intention of adopting that for my own company, once it's finished. This is a work in progress. Keep in mind, this is a very ripe area for research. And I think that this kind of thing is awesome, master thesis material for anybody studying law at the university. And I hope we can build some community to work on this. What I aim to do is I want to create a proof of concept contract using Dutch law. And then once we have it with Dutch law, of course, then we can post it as open source on GitHub or somewhere else, somewhere on the internet, and then say to the world, hey, here it is. It is in the jurisdiction of the Netherlands, but you guys can translate it to your own local law. These are the kinds of things that we can do together. But where do we start with this legal hacking? There's a couple different ways that we can pursue it. So we can start by hacking the actual contracts themselves. So the question is, can we bury these restrictions and the social mission into the statutes of either the company or the foundation or both? Can we make use of the shareholder agreement? It turns out it's actually easier to use the shareholder agreement than the statutes because there's quite a few restrictions imposed by the government on the statutes and what needs to be in there and what can't be in there. But the shareholders agreement, ironically enough, actually offers a lot more leeway for being able to put in unconventional things. So that actually is a tool that we can use to get perhaps leverage our restrictions in there. And can we also create a preamble also that we can use to put, again, shoehorn our restrictions and other things into? Other possible techniques, leveraging voting rights. Could we create a post-growth business foundation, that basically does nothing else than hold one single minuscule tiny share from each post-growth company just to make sure that it has veto power if you want to sell it? That kind of thing could work. Another idea is using a system of decentralized contracts, which actually starts to smell a little bit like blockchain. Although, I've got a lot of opinions as a security expert about blockchain, and I could give a whole different presentation on that, and I'm not going to, not today anyway. But first, I have to say the idea of decentralized contracts is actually completely separate than the cryptographic implementation of blockchain as a technology. If you just think conceptually about decentralized contracts and systems of decentralized contracts, I think that's a very brilliant idea. And I think that there's a lot of power in that. So the question is, can we build coherent entities, out of constellations of decentralized business-to-business contracts? I think this is an interesting idea. I think in practice it might be a bit more difficult than using the first two. Just because, if for any reason, most of the time customers want some centralized entity they can sue if things go wrong. Sad but true. So, I think that these are all solutions that lawyers and also academics can spend some amount of time exploring, but this is still work in progress. But right now we're essentially working primarily on the first one with the contract hacking. Of course, we have to consider with all of this that there's an attacker model. Again, I'm coming at this from my security professional perspective, but everything can be attacked. And it's super interesting and it's super instructive to actually look at how it can be attacked, because there's absolutely no way that we can hope to make it watertight without making a proper list of the threats. So, some of the possible ways that I would see to be able to attack these legal forms, things like default. So basically, which means failure to fulfill your contractual obligations. So basically, okay, so it says in the shareholder agreement, I'm not allowed to sell the company. Well, what if I do it anyways? That's why we need that draconian default clause, or other things, to actually be able to combat somebody from defaulting. Other ways you could cheat: large management fees, from either the company or the foundation. How do you restrict that? Tricky, But again, this is research. I'm not going to be able to solve all this myself, but I believe an entire academic community of legal experts and scholars can find ways to solve all this. And I'm hoping, of course, by telling this story that I'm going to promote and stimulate, those lawyers to work on and think about these things. Other things, bribing the director to dissolve the company. Yeah, how do you stop that? I know, another good question. I mean, but yeah. There's more attacks possible, I'm sure. So we really need to take the time to go through and make a proper category of all the different attack scenarios, so we can then try and figure out countermeasures one by one. This is actually the reason why, in the end, a purpose-fit legal entity would be the best. But, that is expecting the government to do something, and you guys know how slow governments tend to move. So the point is, we cannot expect government cooperation on any of this in the short term, which basically means we need to do it ourselves. So at the end of the day, it's a best effort, but it needs to also be collaborative. It needs to be a group effort in trying to figure all of this stuff out, because I can't figure all this out by myself, but I believe a whole dynamic community surrounding this set of issues and practices can.